Planning Commission meeting of December 11th, 2024 is called to order. As I say your name, please state here. Commissioner Barnett.
Here.
Commissioner Burnett.
Here.
Commissioner Hanson.
Here.
And I am here as well. Please note that Chair Rossby is absent this evening. Commissioner Burnett, can you please say the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which we stand, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. As the Planning Commission conducts the meeting this evening, we encourage active participation by the public, which is essential to the important work of the Planning Commission. Public input is very much welcomed and is always considered by the Commission. During our meeting, there are two opportunities for members of the public to participate. First, during the verbal communications period, an individual may speak on any topic that is not on the agenda for tonight's meeting. Next, during the public hearing portion, any member of the public may speak on the item being heard at that time. You will be advised of the times when you speak on these items. If you wish to address the Commission during either the verbal communications time or when we consider an agenda item, please raise your hand if you are on the Zoom app. Or if you are in person, please fill out a speaker card and hand it to staff. Please write your name clearly, or if you are speaking anonymously, just write down your initials. When you speak, I ask that you come up to the microphone and speak directly into it. This is important because the meeting is being recorded. Also, when you are called to speak, please state your name and address for the record or indicate that you are speaking anonymously. In fairness to all who wish to participate at this meeting, it is necessary that you limit your time to 3 minutes. With that being said, we will enter the verbal communications portion of the meeting. Verbal communications is where any member of the public can address the Commission on any matter not on the agenda. Staff will announce when your 3-minute limit is up. Are there any, I don't have any cards. Are there any hands on Zoom?
There are not.
Okay. Perfect. I have no speaker cards and there are no hands raised on Zoom. Does anyone in the audience wish to speak on an item not on the agenda? Seeing none, we will now move to the consent calendar portion of the agenda. Tonight, we have 2 items on the consent calendar. Item 1 being the approval of the November 13th, 2024 meeting minutes, and item 2 being an annual review of an approved conditional use permit for an existing private school, Hillbrook School, on property zoned HR-1 located at 300 Marchmont Drive. APNs 532-10-001 and 532-11-011. Conditional use permit application U-12-002. Applicant/property owner Mark Silver /Hillbrook School. Before the Planning Commission acts on the consent calendar, any member of the Commission may request that either item be removed from the consent and moved to the public hearing for discussion. Are there any such requests? Or are there any disclosures for item 2?
Yes, Chair. I will be, or Vice Chair, I will be recusing myself on consent item number 2 due to my proximity to the Hillbrook School premises.
Thank you. And can any members of the public pull it? Do I need to ask that? Because that's not on here, but okay.
Yes.
Okay. Are there any members of the public that would like to pull either item from the consent calendar for discussion? Okay, this is your only time that you can make public comment on it. Anyone on Zoom? Perfect. Do we have a motion to approve?
I have a question through the chair to our staff. Since Commissioner Barnett is recused, we don't have a quorum. So can we consider this item?
If it's time sensitive, the commission could draw straws. Otherwise, it could be continued to the next planning commission meeting. have to be done by the end of the year. My recommendation would be that the item be continued.
If we want to pull it for discussion. Or, oh,
I think the quorum issue affects it, whether it's on consent calendar or the public hearing portion of the meeting.
oh, okay. So do we want to, can we make a motion on one of the, does someone want to make a motion to approve the minutes? And then we can also include a motion to continue to a date certain. Okay. Anyone want to do that for me? Or I can do that? I did that. I just did it. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Sorry. Now I got to do this part. Now, by a show of hands, or does anyone discussion? No. By a show of hands, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. Motion carries unanimously 4-0 for item 1, and then for both things sorry, thank you. We will now move to the public hearing portion.
Chair? As to item 2 on the consent calendar, we haven't had a motion to continue that to a date uncertain.
Oh, I thought that was included in my motion. Do we want to continue it to a date uncertain so that we can coordinate with no, to a date certain? Okay.
Correct. January 8th.
January 8th. We can move on.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. The first item on our public hearings agenda is item number 1. This is to, sorry, I need to get to it. I thought it was on here. Okay, item number 3. This is, item number 3 is requesting approval for modification of plan development ordinance 1412, subdivision of 1 lot into 2 lots, construction of a single-family residence, and site work requiring a grading permit on property zoned OPD located at 120 Oak Meadow Drive, APN 529-10-131, subdivision application M-20-011 or 011, plan development application PD-20-002, architecture and site application S-22-021, categorically exempt pursuant to CEQA guidelines section 15315, minor land divisions, 15303, new construction, and 15304, minor alterations to land. Property owner Marty and Penny McFarland, applicants Terrence J. Sezwick, sorry about that, M-20-011 and PD-20-002, and J. Plett Architect S-22-021. Project planner is Mr. Mullen. First, by a show of hands, commissioners, can I see all those who have visited the property? Are there any disclosures? Seeing none, Mr. Mullen, will you be giving the staff report tonight?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair, and good evening. The request before you this evening is for a modification to an existing plan development overlay zone that would allow subdivision of 1 lot into 2 lots and construction of a new single-family residence. On January 24th of this year, the Planning Commission received the staff report, applicant's presentation, and public comments. Included in the public comments was testimony from a neighbor and a board member of the Regency Court HOA who indicated that the HOA maintained architectural control over the subject property and that this architectural review had not taken place. After discussing the matter, the Commission voted to continue consideration of this item to a date uncertain to allow the applicant sufficient time to complete coordination with the HOA. Following this, the July meeting, the applicant and the HOA met and reached agreement on the project as provided in the letters attached to your staff report. The HOA's approval of the project included several conditions enforceable by the HOA, including requiring that the second-story windows on the west elevation are to be utilized obscured glass, to restrict the current and future owners from removing or modifying the existing brick wall along the west property line, and that this wall is to be extended to the north using the same vertical siding as is included on the proposed second story of the residence, and several conditions related to construction activities, garbage collection, access, road maintenance, and costs related to updating the CCNRs are also included. The applicant has agreed to these conditions and provided revised plans responding to the conditions. Noted in the revised plans are some of the physical changes to the residence, the obscured glass on the second story, and notes regarding access and extending the wall. To refresh the commission on the proposal for your consideration, the applicant's requesting approval to modify PD Ordinance 1412 to allow subdivision of the subject property into 2 lots and construction of a new 2-story single-family residence. Parcel A would include the existing residence, and Parcel B would be developed with the new residence. The requested modifications to the PD include performance standards affecting both parcels to allow from deviations from the underlying office zone requirements and applicable sections of the hillside development standards and guidelines as detailed in the July 24th staff report. If the commission finds merit with the proposed project, staff recommends taking the actions included on pages 4 and 5 of tonight's staff report, and to forward the PD, subdivision, and architecture and site applications to the town council with a recommendation of approval. This concludes staff's presentation, and we are available to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do any commissioners have questions for staff at this point? Okay. Oh, yes. Commissioner Hanson.
My question is this. It was mentioned in the staff report that the conditions that came from the HOA were included as conditions of approval that would be monitored by the town. And if I recalled correctly, or if from our last meeting, I think our town attorney had said that the town has no authority over a matter that relates to HOAs. Although I guess you could consider this like a neighborhood compatibility issue. So my question is it legally appropriate to have those as conditions of approval?
Good question. And so the only elements that have been incorporated into the planning approval are the physical changes. There is information in the packet that talks about the property owner promising to pay the HOA for the cost of amending the CCNR agreement. And that agreement has not been included in the approval that is before the Planning Commission. So only the physical changes to the structure are reflected in what the Planning Commission is being asked to approve.
Okay. Are the conditions clearly objective in that if we were to say our, town staff said that it was completed and the HOA did not?
I'll defer to Sean.
Okay.
I think they're physical things that can easily be verified, but I'll defer to Sean.
Thank you. So if we walk through the conditions, which I won't do because I'm trying to keep things moving this evening, but you'd notice that the building has been updated to note that there's obscured glass. There's some notes on here about extending the wall. These are sort of the physical changes to the property. There's also notes on here about construction access and future access restrictions on one of the property lines and garbage collection. Those types of things are noted on the plans, and any approval of the project tonight would carry those because the applicant has included those with their plans. The conditions of the HOA that staff would recommend not including have to do with the private party agreements, such as cost sharing or cost responsibility for updating the CCNRs. That's not something that the town would historically get involved in.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any additional questions for staff? Seeing none, I will now open the floor to public comment. First, would the applicant like to provide an opening statement? This would be 5 minutes. please.
Good evening, Commission members. Jay Plett, architect here, 16 Linden Avenue. Yeah, we believe that the project has been very well designed through much time with the planning department and fire department. It respects the native trees, mature oaks that are there. As a matter of fact, the house was intentionally designed around the trees and their preservation. The HOA, Marty and I met with the HOA members in my office and came to the agreement of the debris fence, the obscure window, and they were fine with we submitted these plans to them, and they consented that they were in agreement with these changes, and they submitted an email to Sean to that effect.
Thank you. Would anyone else from your team like to speak tonight?
Mr. Shevchuk has his hand raised, Jay, so I don't know if he wants to speak as well, but I'm going to allow him to speak. Mr. Shevchuk, if you have anything additional, go ahead and speak.
No, I don't. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before you leave, sorry, are there any questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item, or anyone on Zoom? I don't have any cards, so we're good.
There's
Okay.
No one with a hand raised on Zoom.
Okay. So are we still sure that there's no questions for the applicant? I guess you have another 3 minutes if you need to say anything else. We're good? Okay. Are there any questions for the applicant at this point before I close the public portion? Okay. I will now close the public comment portion and look for discussion or a motion from the commission. Commissioner Burnett.
Yes, after reviewing the information given to us from staff and the response from the architect and the homeowners and developers, it seems that the requests that the objections we had or the suggestions we had at the last planning commission meeting were met, and that with the architect's letter description of what will be followed up on and carried through on the project, it seems that all the questions we had regarding the project were answered. So I think from my perspective, I think that you met all of the requests that we had, and so I would feel that I would vote for moving forward and requesting your application.
Commissioner Barnett?
I just wanted to point out that although the physical requests by the association have been met in the amended plans, that there is the intention to have a CC&R amendment so that the CC&Rs apply to the newly created lot, and that that issue apparently is not going to be decided tonight as a part of the approval. I think that that's okay, but it troubles me a little bit if, for example, the CC&R amendment were not approved. What would happen then? Unlikely, perhaps, but possible.
Yes, Ms. Whalen.
Alternatively, the commission could continue this item until the CC&Rs have been amended.
And I'll just offer from a historical perspective, Planning Commission never sees CC&Rs. So those are handled after the approval is done. So those modifications would also be handled by staff. They wouldn't come back before a deciding body.
Thanks for that.
Commissioner Hanson.
If I recall from the last meeting, we had reviewed the elements in the requested variances that we required from our code to make this plan development ordinance a reality, and that the only issue was the HOA coming up at the last minute saying, well, we have, and even though we aren't accountable to the HOA as a body, that being the town, that they seem to have met their requirement, where they met with them and they have an agreement, so that I think we can move forward. And as staff pointed out, we would have no jurisdiction over those private agreements anyways. So that, like I was saying earlier, I think the obscured window and the fence are planning issues. So I'm comfortable with this application.
Thank you. Anyone? Yes, Commissioner Burnett.
I have a proposed motion, if the Vice Chair agrees. I'll do my best to present that. I move to recommend approval by the Town Council of the application requesting approval for modification of a plan development ordinance, 1412, subdivision of one lot into two lots, construction of a new two-story single-family residence, and site work requiring a grading permit on property zone OPD, located at 120 Oak Meadow Drive, APN 529-10-131, subdivision application M2011, plan development application PD 20002, architecture and site application S22021, categorically exempt pursuant to CEQA guidelines 15-315, minor land divisions, and new construction in 15-304 as well. I can make each of the findings as set forth on pages 3 and 4 of the staff report, which are pages 97 to 98 of the package, including the revised development plans included as Exhibit 21 and the approvals included in Exhibit 4. I think that's it, unless staff has proposed additions. No?
Do I have a second? Commissioner Hanson?
I second the motion.
Any discussion? Seeing none, by a show of hands, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. It passes unanimously, 4-0. Thank you. Staff, are there any appeal rights or no, because this is just a recommendation to council?
Since this is a recommendation, there are no appeal rights.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is item number 4. So this is to forward a recommendation to the town council on an ordinance amending chapter 29 of our zoning regulations of the town code regarding parking standards pursuant to the implementation program AA of the 2023 to 2031 housing element. Adoption of this ordinance is exempt pursuant to CEQA section 515061B3, in that it can be seen with certainty that it will not impact the environment. Town Code Amendment Application A-24-009. Project location is townwide, and the applicant is the town of Los Gatos. And I believe, Mr. Mullen, you'll be providing the staff report. Thank you.
Yes, thank you again, Vice Chair. Before you this evening is consideration of Town Code amendments required through the Housing Element Implementation Program AA regarding reduced parking requirements. Program AA requires that the town initiate a study and outreach and make specific updates that would reduce parking standards in the town by aligning parking standards, parking requirements with the preparation of the objective design standards, by reducing parking requirements near transit, by removing guest parking requirements for all residential and mixed use projects in all zones, and by allowing parking to be unbundled from residential units. For item number 1, no action is needed at the town since the final objective design standards document did not include parking standards. For item 4, regarding unbundled parking, staff's currently studying existing state law and programs in other municipalities and anticipates returning to the Planning Commission with amendments to the town code in the spring of next year. The staff report details the proposed changes to town code for implementation of items number 2 for reduced parking near transit, and item number 3, removing the guest parking requirements throughout the town. Additional code amendments for parking are also included in the draft amendments to reintroduce parking requirements that were erroneously removed during a previous code update, and remove some other language for clarity. In April, the town will be reporting progress made on this and other implementation programs to HCD to demonstrate compliance with the certified housing element. This concludes staff's presentation, and we are available for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff at this time? Commissioner Hanson.
Because there's multiple items in here, and some of them are not for action or not, we're making a recommendation to council on the specific items that we need to, that are mentioned in the staff report, or do we need to itemize them in any motion we would make?
Thank you for that question. I think you can go either way. I think if there's consensus with the draft amendments as proposed by staff, then a single motion could carry the recommendation forward. If there's significant changes or recommendations to be made, it's the option of the Planning Commission and the Vice Chair to go item by item.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Burnett and then Barnett.
Thank you. Questions for staff? So this only pertains to sites on our housing element, correct?
Thank you for that question. No, this would pertain beyond to the town for the affected parcels, not just the HEOS sites.
So it would be townwide?
Be townwide in that some of these would relate to parcels and their proximity to transit stops in one instance, and then townwide for removal of the guest parking requirement for multifamily housing.
Oh, single-family districts, R1, R-1?
It's more about the use because the parking code applies regardless of the zoning. So if you had, let's say, a non-conforming multifamily development in a R18 district, which is not where our multifamily project would be permitted, then the guest parking requirements would be removed. I'm using that as an example.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Barnett.
Thank you. Mr. Mullen or other members of the staff, if the town council agreed with recommendations by the Planning Commission to approve the changes, would all of the implementation program AA be included except for number 4 unbundling?
Thank you for that question. That's correct. The unbundled parking is not part of the draft amendments before you tonight, but staff anticipates returning with those in the spring. Item 1, there's no action needed since the Objective Design Standards document, which was under development at the time of the housing element draft, ended up not including parking standards. So we'd just be looking at items 2 and 3, and then the additional code cleanup items that aren't related to the program.
Okay, and just a follow-up. So the implementation program, AA, has quite a number of items in it, and what I was trying to ferret out is whether all of those intended implementation items are being addressed by this amendment, except for unbundling, number 4.
Thank you for that. It would be items 2 and 3 that it would be addressed through tonight's proposed amendments.
Okay, 2 and 3 only. Thank you.
Okay, and then any other questions for staff? I did have one question. Could Mr. Mullen, could you just explain kind of why we're seeing some of these implementation programs right now and the, context for it with regards to next steps with regards to the housing element?
Sure. Thank you for that question. I can start and someone else can jump in if there's more information needed. As part of the adopted housing element, as you may be aware and for the public's knowledge, there was a number of implementation programs that the town included in our certified housing element. Most of them have a timeline, and the town is busy working on making progress on those implementation programs and intends to provide a progress report to HCD in April of this year, and then continuing progress reports following that to show whether we've completed programs, or in this case, we'd be making progress on a program and come back with further progress later on. But it's all in an effort to adhere to the housing element and maintain its certification.
Great, thank you. Yes, Commissioner Burnett.
Thank you. Question, so these new changes, they will become part of our objective design standards? How will that, because going through the standards we have now, this is not addressed.
So thank you for that question. The objective design standards do not include any quantitative parking requirements such as number of spaces per square footage or space or use. The amendments in front of you tonight would be included in the parking division of Chapter 29, which is the zoning code.
Because it was mentioned that it would be in aligned parking requirements with the when we add to our objective design standards. So it will become part of that in some way, though, right?
So and to clarify, because it does get a little bit confusing on the timing, admittedly. So when these implementation programs were being considered and drafted by the council and the planning commission, at the same time and on a separate track, the objective design standards document was in development. As part of development of program AA in its draft form, the implementation program wanted to make sure that any parking standards that would end up in the objective design standards align with the town code. The finished product of the objective design standards does not include parking requirements, such as quantity. There's some things about treating parking lots, but that's a separate issue. This is about parking quantity requirements. So there's no action needed on item 1 because of the timing of when the design standards were being drafted and when the program was being drafted.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Hanson.
I just had a comment. It was my recollection, since I was one of the people that worked on the objective design standards, at least the version 1, that when we went through everything, if it was already objective in our code, we opted not to duplicate it in the objective design standards, because then you have an updating issue if you ever go to change anything. So that is why you wouldn't necessarily need to put this in the objective design standards, because we already have it in our code. And if that's not right, then please correct me.
Yeah, thank you for that. I worked on the objective design standards, and I remember those conversations and agree with that.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions or? Okay, we will now open the floor to public comment. So is there anyone in the public that wants to on Zoom?
Through the chair, there's no hands raised on Zoom currently.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. I will close the public comment portion of the evening and ask for look for discussion and possibly a motion. Commissioner Burnett.
Yeah, I think this item, I'm having problems with the parking issues. Why are we removing guest parking requirements when you have in all areas? I mean, I'm just wondering why are we needing to do that?
So thank you for that question. I can start and someone can jump in if they have other information. I think the intent was to remove barriers to creating housing. That was part of the driving force of the housing element through guidance through HCD. So as this may have been the guest parking may have been identified as a barrier to creating additional housing on parcels or new housing in multifamily developments. Clarify that.
And I'll just add, thank you through the chair. Yeah, all of these implementation programs, many of them were requirements of HCD for us to get certification. And to Mr. Mullins' point, they're looking to remove as many barriers as possible across the state, the town included, and parking is often a barrier because it's so expensive to create. And so that's one that's in many housing elements across the state.
And that, to continue, sorry, and that includes housing that's already in our environment and in our different zones? I mean.
Yeah, I mean, for a little bit more clarification, I think you asked a question before about single-family homes. Those don't require guest parking. Only multifamily rentals currently require guest parking. and that's up to 1 space per unit. We have other documents like the North 40 specific plan, which requires, I think, a half space for guests. That's ultimately something that we might have to modify as well. It also has requirements based on the number of bedrooms. There's also reduced parking in state law through state density bonus statute. And so what we're seeing is with the environment that we have with current state law, through state density bonus, folks are requesting waivers anyway to be even less than 1 in some cases. So that's not something we're ultimately going to be able to enforce moving forward. So this really is, again, this is something the state is requiring through the housing element. If we choose not to do that, then there may be consequences down the line with this or any of the other items that we bring forward.
So again, so is this for new development, new mixed use, new homes, new?
Yeah, so new multifamily projects or mixed use projects going forward would not be required to do guest parking.
So this is moving forward.
It is moving forward. So this, you know, will we see existing developments request maybe additional development and remove some of that parking? That's possible. We haven't seen that, and we have enough on our plates with the new projects that are currently in the pipeline.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Barnett.
For Mr. Mulliner's staff, understood that the implementation program is to satisfy the requirements of HCD. How were the particular details and formulas established to try to achieve that goal of approval in April?
Thank you for that question. I'd ask a clarifying question specific to the changes in the ordinance in the draft amendments.
Yes.
Like, how did staff determine? I think it.
What the new formulas would be.
Gotcha. So the removing the guest parking requirement is pretty binary. It's pretty straightforward. We needed to remove it. The reduced parking near transit was a balancing act at looking, and it's kind of laid out in your staff report, but looking at what's required in other ordinances. I looked at the ADU ordinance and the SB9 ordinance, the requirements for reduced parking and density bonus law, and so on. So we looked at these things. We looked at other communities similar to ours in Santa Clara County, and tried to strike a balance between the needs of the community, but also being responsive to HCD's requirement that we reduce parking near transit. And to the transit point, there's so many different, it's an ambiguous term that's included in the housing element. And so that was an evaluation of, again, where's it going to be effective and responsive to HCD's requirements to remove or reduce parking near transit. So what's in front of you tonight would reduce parking within a half mile of for multifamily development, to be clear about that, within a half mile of transit stops or bus stops, and that's a half mile walking distance.
And just to add also, Commissioner Barnett, so for instance, our current requirement's 1.5 for those types of units. So, I mean, we could have gone to 1.25 or 1.15 or some other number in between 1 and 1.5, but that's not typical across jurisdictions. So I think that was another point why we kind of landed there.
Thank you for both of those comments. Very helpful.
I have one question about, as you were looking at some of the other jurisdictions, especially in the Bay Area, are some fully eliminating parking requirements?
Thank you for that question. You'll see that I can't remember the jurisdictions offhand, but there are some typically in bigger cities with more dense development. A lot of those programs that remove parking tag on to other strategies as well. So transit, where you see more frequent transit, high quality transit corridors, it might tie to those sorts of things. The approach here was to recognize the level of transit we have in our community, which is pretty low frequency, low headway, and also recognize that while we're only reducing it by a half parking space per unit, when you combine that with the reduction in the guest parking, it was about that balance and not over reducing too far so that there's still some parking required on site. With all that said, there's obviously, as Director Paulson mentioned, there's other strategies through state laws to reduce further and in some cases ignore the town's requirements.
Thank you. I would just like to make a comment, I think, about this, if we're ready for some discussion on it. Or, I mean, like, instead of just asking. Okay. So I think that I recognize that we don't have a lot of options for transit, unfortunately, in Los Gatos, but something that, VTA said, has kind of said many times about, like, the light rail. We can't build the light rail all the way to Los Gatos if we don't have housing and people living there that would use it. And so I think this is kind of a way that we start to get there with these, like, reducing parking minimums, because we know that we've seen many applications just in my time on the Planning Commission that parking can be really a limiting factor for some of these developers. However, because we don't have all of those options with all of this transit, and it's not really realistic for most people to live without a car that, live in Los Gatos and are of working age and commuting outside of our community, I don't think that developers are going to there's still an incentive for parking spots. Like, I don't think that we're at a place where people are just going to want no parking. So I see this as like quite a good balance, but I am curious what my other fellow commissioners think. Yeah, Commissioner Hanson.
Since I was on the Housing Element Advisory Board, I was the chair, we heard over and over again during the process of developing the housing element that parking requirements, as mentioned by our community development director, are an impediment to building new housing. We had testimony from a number of developers that developed here in some of the study sessions that we had, and it goes further than that. Jurisdictions that have certified housing elements that opt not to follow through on their programs that facilitate that housing can have their certification removed. So this isn't a decision that we can opt not to make. And I think there's good questions, but this is the direction that the state is going, and whether it applies to the sites that are in the housing element or the entire town, while it could ultimately become burdensome, I think the developers have to be sensible when they're building housing that's going to work for the people that are going to be renting or procuring that housing.
Yes, Commissioner Burnett.
I have a question for Vice Chair. You mentioned that it was a nice balance. Could you expound on that a little bit, what you meant by that?
I think that, before the 1.5 down to 1, for example, we could be going farther than that. I mean, hopefully this is enough for HCD to show that we're making progress towards removing parking, removing parking as a barrier to build housing. We could be going farther, but I also understand that right now we live in a space that people need to have cars because we don't have the transit available. So that's what I meant. But I was also on the Housing Element Advisory Board, and also at those meetings where developer after study sessions where developer after developer asked for, they wanted the parking minimums to go away, not just for for all development, not just for housing, for commercial development, for all these things. It was just to redevelop and encourage redevelopment along Los Gatos Boulevard. It was, asked for. So I think that this is something that meets some of those needs of the developers that the town at some point is having to, partner with in order to make progress towards our housing element goals.
Oh, thank you for that. I think my concern is that, and I understand for developers and new development coming in, when I asked the question whether this is town-wide, I'm concerned about what we have in place now and the neighborhoods we have in place now. Are there parking rules going to change? Are there guest parking needs, or Are those going to be taken away, or how is it going to impact, what is in our town now versus new development? That's where I'm getting confused here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously a challenge. And as I tried to explain earlier, we don't know if some of our existing multifamily, for instance, is going to request, hey, I have the density to add 3 more units. I'm going to remove X number of parking spaces and add those, and it complies with your new town code. We don't know whether or not that's going to be an issue moving forward and how frequent that may or may not be. I know there are discussions, early discussions of other potential strategies, because obviously even just the SB 330 applications we currently have, not to mention the existing multifamily, there is that potential with just the sheer number of units and the amount of parking being provided. There probably could be collateral impacts to other public parking that currently exists that's not regulated. So that's a strategy I think that will be evaluated moving forward. But again, there's nothing really concrete yet.
To follow up, so why can't we just limit it to what is before us with our site inventory, and then if the need comes for more housing and we have to rezone areas, then we would make a new amendment to the zoning code? Why are we?
Because HCD required us to remove all required guest parking from our zoning code. That's why we're doing it. They didn't say remove it just for your sites, because other sites may redevelop too. So, they're interested in removing barriers to have as much housing built all over California as possible. And so, again, this is not an uncommon request.
Guest parking, even in areas that aren't going to be part of the housing element?
Yes, absolutely. Because they're not just interested in housing element sites. They're interested in every site.
Thank you.
Any other? Okay, Commissioner Barnett.
I wanted to bring up that I had an exchange of emails with Mr. Mullen today because I questioned the definition of transit stop in the proposed new language, and I know there's a couple terms that you looked at. Like, was it a major? Help me with the two terms. Major transit stop.
There's a high quality transit corridor and a major transit stop. Those are defined terms in state law in different statutes, and are used throughout different state law and in some of our ordinances, specifically SB 9. And the proposal here is for transit stops. So that would be equated to a bus stop in this town. As the area of a high quality train, we don't have any major bus stops by definition. So that's ruled out. The high quality transit corridor that we do have is very limited. It's out near Good Sam. And in that balance, again, of being responsive to HCD's requirements to reduce parking near transit versus looking at how the impacts would be distributed through the town, the decision was made to pursue bus stops, or in this case called transit stops, so half-mile walking distance to transit stops. And we've only got, I think, 3 bus lines that serve the town in different locations, but 2 of them are just on the edge and 1 runs through the town.
Okay, thank you. So to my fellow commissioners, I would suggest that as part of a motion approving this matter, that we make a suggestion for staff to possibly propose a definition for transit stop for consideration by the town council, since it's a new term.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a good idea. I support that. Is that something that will be easy for staff to do when it presents to council?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
Oh, I'm sorry. I had 2
Oh,
more.
yeah. Go for it.
On page 132, item 3C, there's just a reference to downtown, and I thought it might be changed to the downtown zone because Town Code 29-40 and following use that term. That would be a suggestion for a change to the proposed language. And then the last one is, I hope I got this right. The proposed language refers to parking for theaters, and it says 1 parking space for each 300 square feet of gross floor area. And my question is, what about the Los Gatos Theater?
So thank you for that question. That parking requirement, so item 3 and then below it, number 4, 3 was in the code until sometime last year, and it was mistakenly removed through a code update that had to do with economic vitality. It was not proposed to be removed. I just got caught by our codifier and unfortunately got pulled out by the way that the ordinance was written. So all we're doing here, this isn't a new requirement for the town. All we're doing here is reinstating it in the downtown area. So item 3 would fall under the downtown area. Item 4 is moving some language to where it belongs. It was included with the hospital requirement for parking for some reason for many years. So this is just cleanup. There's no new requirements here.
And through the chair, there is a little nuance with the downtown versus the C2, for instance. The downtown is actually, from a parking perspective, broader. It actually goes into the C1. We have a map where it's actually broader than just the C2 district. So that's why it is referenced currently and proposed to be moving forward as downtown.
Okay, so I'll withdraw a suggestion of changing that language. But
Okay.
does the Los Gatos Theater comply in terms of current parking regulations?
I don't have that information in front of me. It's also in the parking assessment district, which further complicates things to answer on the fly. But it's an existing condition, and if it didn't comply, then it's existing non-conforming.
Okay, that makes sense.
Thank you. Then thank you for clarifying about the parking or the downtown area, because that we do want that language to be consistent throughout. Are there any other? Okay. Yes, Commissioner Hanson.
Are we ready to make a motion, or is there more questions?
I just have one more comment.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I just want to say that I think that as someone that, was on the Housing Element Advisory Board and worked very hard both on that and on the Planning Commission to get a certified housing element, passed and adopted in town, I feel like it's really important for us to continue to push forward with this, with the implementation programs that are considered lower hanging fruit. And it does specifically say that, some of these implementation programs that were adopted with the housing element, there's going to be some requirements and language in there that people might have issues with or question, but it's already part of the town's housing element. And so we're kind of going to have to just continue forward with them. We can't go back and undo it. And I think the risk of getting it decertified is something that we really don't want to do. So focusing on the stuff we have control over moving forward, and just really getting like I said, the easier code amendments and updates that don't cost as much money and time or energy by staff pushed forward through town council, I think is going to be really important moving forward. So I just want to thank everyone that's worked hard on all of this stuff. And now, are we ready for a motion, Commissioner Hanson? I think because it's just one, because we just have that one minor addition, we can do everything in one. Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Just further comment here. So in the, the programs under AA is what we're discussing. And it removed guest parking requirements for all residential and mixed use projects in all zones. And as Joel had said, this is an HCD requirement. And it would be nice to also include in the staff report where you can find that HCD requirement, because in reading materials, I never came across that specific language that we had to remove.
Thank you, Commissioner Burnett. So I think that's actually the specific language of the implementation program, the 4 topics that are listed in the staff report. I would just look to Mr. Mullen to nod his head and agree with that, but that is the specific language in the implementation program, and that's what we're trying to bring forward with all of these. I think to the Vice Chair's point, there's going to be a number of these topics that folks have had concern with, are going to continue to have concern with, but the reality is that, you know, if the town decides ultimately most of this stuff will end up at the council, decide to adopt an implementation that HCD doesn't agree with. Worst case scenario, as was mentioned by Commissioner Hansen, we could be decertified. There's steps in between that where we probably would be allowed to, you know, discuss rectifying that. But nevertheless, that is the potential worst case scenario. So that's going to be challenging moving forward with a lot of this stuff. And so that is something to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, Commissioner Hansen.
So I'd like to make a motion that we forward a recommendation to the town council to move forward on parts of implementation of program AA, including reducing parking requirements near transit and removing guest parking requirements for all residential and mixed-use projects in all zones, as well as some additional cleanup items in our general parking code. And those are the items that we can forward on for recommendation at this time.
Is there a second? Oh, yes, Director Paulson.
I would just for the record that's in accordance with the findings as illustrated in the staff report and the code amendments in Exhibit 2, just for extra clarification.
Yes, and also that there is no impact net for CEQA. So,
Can I get a second? Perfect. Commissioner Burnett?
Yes, second the motion.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Through the Vice Chair,
Yeah.
there was some consensus about the definition, but that was not included in the motion, just for clarification.
I would be happy to amend the motion to say that we should have a clear definition of a transit stop incorporated as we forward this along and put it in our code.
Seconder agrees.
Any discussion? Seeing none, by show of hands, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. And the motion passes 3-0 with Commissioner Burnett dissenting. Or 3-1, sorry. And appeal rights, again, because this is a recommendation.
That's correct. This is a recommendation of the council, so it's not subject to appeal.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we will be moving on to item 5 on our agenda, which is to forward a recommendation to the town council on amendments to chapter 29, our zoning regulations of the town code regarding considerations for an architecture and site application, findings for a conditional use permit, manufactured housing and private open space and community recreation space requirements pursuant to the implementation program AQ of the 2023-2031 housing element. Adoption of this ordinance is exempt pursuant to CEQA section 15061B3 in that it can be seen with certainty that it will not impact the environment. Town Code Amendment Application A-24-008 and the project location is town-wide. And Ms. Shootman has the staff report, I believe. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. Before the Planning Commission this evening for consideration is Implementation Program AQ of the town's housing element, which requires various amendments to Chapter 29 of the Town Code. The draft ordinance with the proposed amendments can be viewed in Exhibit 2. Program AQ includes 11 items, of which 3 have already been completed. 1 is pending adoption by the Town Council at their next meeting on December 17th, and 2 will be addressed through other implementation programs. The draft ordinance before you this evening focuses on the remaining items, which include amendments to the considerations for an architecture and site application with specific modifications to findings 4 and 6 as directed by HCD, amendments to the findings for a conditional use permit with specific modifications to findings 1 and 2 as directed by HCD, an amendment to the definition of a single-family dwelling by adding that the definition also includes manufactured homes pursuant to section 65852.3 of the Government Code. And lastly, amendments to the private open space and the community recreation space requirements for both a multifamily and condominium project to align them with the requirements provided in the objective design standards. In April, the town will report completion of and progress made on this and other implementation programs to HCD to demonstrate compliance with the town's certified housing element. This concludes staff's presentation, but I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Ms. Shootman, do any members of the commission have questions before we open for public comment? Of staff? Yes, Commissioner Burnett.
Yes, question for staff. So again, is this only to the site inventory? These are amendments to the...
No, so these amendments are town-wide. They're not limited to the site's inventory.
I see. And when it was mentioned in the staff report that the amendments to Chapter 29 of the Town Code are consistent with the general plan, I did not find that in the general plan. Where is it? Where are these amendments in Chapter 29 consistent in the general plan?
So from staff's perspective, they are not in the general plan. They're in the zoning code, but the zoning code is consistent with the general plan. And so these modifications to existing findings, from our perspective, are also in conformance with the general plan.
So you're seeing the amendments to Chapter 29 of the Town Code are consistent with the general plan?
Yes, because they have to be. We don't have a choice. Every zoning code amendment has to be consistent with the general plan.
But where
That's a requirement of state law.
But where in the general plan is this mentioned?
It is not. The findings are not mentioned in the general plan. So the zoning code is implementing the general plan, but they don't have the same specific language or topics in an identical form across any of a number of topics.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you.
Commissioner Hanson.
I just have a clarifying question for staff. So you mentioned the 11 items, and then there's like, well, not this one, but then this one is going to be this one. So would it be correct to say that I'm on page 145 at the bottom, those are the things that we need to forward a recommendation on? I'm just trying to figure out a right way to characterize the 11 items, everything but 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, and 5. You know, so you see where I'm going? Help us to figure out how to present this thing to us.
I think
Yes, did we?
with the last item, the attachment, I think it's probably Exhibit 2, which contains the amendments. That's what you're forwarding. So that only encompasses the items that are specifically being addressed tonight. So that's the simplest way to make sure that you capture what we're looking at. But if there are modifications as you go through your discussion on the items before you this evening, then again, as was done before, there could be requested recommendations to the town council for amendments or otherwise.
So another way to say this then would be in Exhibit 2, anything that's in red is what we're forwarding on for recommendation versus trying to extract it from the overall implementation program.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? I will now open the public comment, and I don't have any speaker cards. Are there any hands raised on Zoom for item 5?
There's no one on Zoom.
Thank you. I will now close the public comment period and open up for discussion. I'm looking for discussion or a motion from the commission. Additional questions for staff? Commissioner Barnett?
I don't have any problem with the language in the proposed amendments in attachment 2 to the staff report, and I could make an effort at providing a motion for consideration by the Planning Commission.
Yes, can I just clarify something with staff before you go ahead and make that motion?
Please.
Thank you. So once this, if we forward this and it's forward this recommendation as is to town council and it's adopted, there's just one outstanding item that will be covered by it's like an overlap with a different implementation program.
Yeah, that's correct. So
Okay.
there's a component of program AQ, which is talking about non-residential housing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are proposing to have that addressed through a separate implementation program that the commission will be seeing in the springtime.
Great. Okay. So that's the most efficient way it sounds like, for the town to deal with that. So that's lovely. Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Barnett, if you would like to make your motion. Oh, no, Commissioner Burnett has another question. Okay. Yes.
So section 29.20.150, considerations in review of applications. We're looking at number 4, consideration relating to site layout. Removing some of the verbiage there, I'm wondering why.
Thank you for that question. This is specific language that the town received from HCD that we needed to remove.
Character of the neighborhood, is that because it's some kind of subjective, or they want to have objective?
Yes, so HCD provided these strikeouts, removing these subjective terms from the findings.
But if you look at the description, it always goes back to the general plan. If you look at the description found over and over again, this was the way our town is described. It's not so much subjective, it's a description. So why can't we leave that kind of wording in? Harmony, I mean.
Sure, thanks for that question. So these are subjective terms that the town was directed by HCD to remove. If you look at program AQ, it makes reference to providing more certainty in the outcomes. And so these are subjective terms that HCD deemed should be removed as they're not objective.
Okay, again, but we're talking about town-wide now. I mean, even if, it doesn't bother me if it's for new projects and new sites, but now we're talking about town-wide, that we have to be removing these kinds of terms. Character.
Yeah, again, I know there's been a lot of discussion
Desirable.
in the past about the small town character and look and feel and all the subjective language that, again, as Ms. Shootman mentioned, is specifically what was requested to be removed by the state as our implementation program. So that's, again, why it's before the Planning Commission.
But but again, I'm not trying to be argumentative here, but we're only talking about our housing element, which only pertains, as far as I can look at it, as sites.
No, so I'll
Correct,
try to be
sites.
clear. So the
Okay.
housing implementation programs do not apply only to the housing sites. They apply to all housing in the entire town, existing and proposed moving forward. So that's a misunderstanding maybe that you have, is that the implementation programs only apply to the sites. They do not. The sites are their own separate element of the housing element, but these implementation programs apply town-wide.
But developers and builders can choose whether they want to go on the fast track, which makes they use the objective standard guidelines. And then you can have or they can choose to go through architectural design and have more subjective review. So how can you make a blanket statement like that when there can be two different tracks you follow? So if you follow a track that isn't using objective standards, then you would be able to use the subjective, and you could use character, and you could use you
And
know,
I'll start, and maybe the town attorney will have some additional comments. But we're taking all of the projects, whether they're going through what you describe as the subjective track or the objective track.
right.
We're asking for all the same things in both processes.
Oh, great.
The difference is that in the objective track, we can't require the applicants to make those changes even if we request them. Whereas in the objective or the subjective side, we can compel more of those. Like with a single family home, even the projects that are SB 330, they're going to Larry Cannon. He's providing recommendations, but folks are choosing, how many or if any of those they're interested in making, given that we can only hold them to the objective standards. So nothing is going to change with the process. It's just some of the language. Again, it's from the state's perception that these subjective findings or considerations are, again, they are an obstacle, a barrier to housing. But so far, it hasn't changed how staff is processing either of those types of projects. We're processing the same exact way. We just, in some cases, can compel folks to do things. In other cases, we cannot.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any additional questions or comments? Are we ready for a motion?
I'll present a motion
Thank you.
on item 5 on the calendar tonight. I moved forward a recommendation to the town council on amendments to chapter 29 zoning regulations of the town code regarding considerations for an architectural and site application, findings for a conditional use permit, manufactured housing, and private open space and community recreation space requirements pursuant to the implementation program AQ of the 2023-2031 housing element. Adoption of this ordinance is exempt pursuant to CEQA section 15061B3, in that it can be seen that with certainty that it will not impact the environment. Town Code Amendment Application A24008, and I can make the findings for CEQA on page 149 of the staff report, as well as the findings for the general plan.
Commissioner Hanson?
I'll second the motion.
Just to clarify, the maker of the motion, that includes the language of the proposed ordinance that was included in it? Okay, thank you.
That's included.
Perfect. Okay, and I will call the question, or is there any discussion? Okay, Commissioner Burnett.
Yeah, discussion, I will vote in favor of it to the town council, but I would like to add that I have my sort of trepidations about these amendments, and that I would hope the town council would look clearly at them and make sure that we're on the right track.
Okay, great. Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, by a show of hands, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. The motion passes unanimously. Okay, and that is all on our normal agenda. So our other business, are there any other, I don't think we have any committee reports tonight, subcommittee reports. Okay. But the only other item we have on this is the meeting calendar for 2025. There's no motion required for this item, but it is to inform the commission and public of next year's planning commission meeting schedule. Does anyone have any questions on this? Does any member of the public wish to speak on this item? No one on Zoom still? Okay. Seeing none, we will now move on to the report from the Director of Community Development. Mr. Paulson, do you have a report for us this evening?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Just briefly, Last night, as I'm sure many of you are aware, there was a great ceremony of the transition, the mayor and vice mayor. So now Mayor Hedis and Vice Mayor Moore will continue forward for the next year. A number of items were introduced on 12/3 that the Planning Commission reviewed for the implementation programs that Planning Commission reviewed. They were introduced and they're on the calendar for 12/17 for adoption. And then the last thing is that this is our last meeting of the year, so I want to wish everyone happy holidays and thank you all for all your work over the year thus far.
Thank you. And we have some applicants, hopefully, for Planning Commission to fill some of our seats.
There are a number of Planning Commission applicants. If you're interested, there's actually information on the clerk's website of who applied for every open seat on every commission and committee.
Perfect. Thank you. As I said earlier, I don't believe there are any subcommittee reports, but in addition to our service on the Planning Commission, each commissioner serves on one or more subcommittees, which meet from time to time, but we don't have any report. We haven't met since our last meeting. So, okay. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.